You're listening to a podcast of Master Your Finances with me, Kurt Baker, a certified financial planner professional. Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. on 1077thebronx.com.
Another day, another dollar, and our certified financial planner professional, Kurt Baker, will give you the tips you need to turn that single into a sea of green with Master Your Finances. Whether you have enough to get by or too much in your pockets, Kurt Baker and his weekly guests are here to show you how to manage it all. Master Your Finances is underwritten by Certified Wealth Management and Investment LLC. Now listen up, because it's time to get a hold of those money matters and master your finances.
Good morning and welcome back to another edition of Master Your Finances, presented by Certified Wealth Management and Investment. I'm Kurt Baker, a certified financial planner professional located in Princeton, New Jersey. I can be reached through our website, which is www.cwmi.us, or you can call me directly at 609-716-4700. This week we're very pleased to have with us Andrea Harrison, who holds a BA in Communications with a certification in Teaching in English. She's experienced in different facets of writing in fields such as publishing, education, social services, and marketing. Among some of her career-related writing tasks were editorial work for an educational book publishing company, report writing in the field of vocational rehabilitation, and creation of mail marketing campaigns for a global janitorial services provider. As an elementary teacher, Andrea was involved in much writing instruction of fictional and non-fictional genres and across the school year curriculum, as well as teaching poetry and script writing in a summer enrichment program. Currently, she provides a diverse area of both digital and traditional marketing content to small businesses and individuals for their promotional needs. Her most notable assets are her ability to tell a compelling story and her consciousness with regards to turnaround time and accuracy. Well, storytelling is what radio is all about, so we're going to let you just flourish today. Is that okay? Do you mind?
That's wonderful.
So have you always been a writer? I know I'm not a writer myself or storyteller, but I know my daughter is big time, and she was writing ever since she was very little.
I think I was always a writer. As a child, I loved telling stories. And I loved visualizing scenes in my head and creating stories. I loved writing poetry. I always enjoyed the words in general and putting words together and try to imagine the character and what their situation was. I love it. It's just a passion that I've always had, and to communicate through the written word. And I was always good at English. That was one of my strong points. So.
Well, that's great. So, I mean, it's very important. And what I think is interesting is you have a lot of diverse background here, I think. So it's interesting as a business as well as like the creative side, the fictional, the non-fictional. So those are all a little bit different, right? So how you approach those, right?
That's true. I think all the experiences that I've had have led me back to this. I always wanted to be a writer, but other things got in the way in life. You know, I went to school for communications, and then I ended up in different kinds of work. I taught for many years, and I was a social services counselor. I was in the marketing and customer service field. But then I came around to what I really wanted to do, and I guess all those skills I learned over the years weren't a waste, because they were transferable to what I'm doing now. Yeah. And I would have never dreamed that all of the experience I had would lead back to now and allow me to implement my writing capabilities into a career. So it's just interesting where my life has taken me.
No, I think it's fantastic. I remember reading a survey years ago, and it said one of the number one indicators of somebody's success in life and business, et cetera, is their ability to communicate. And nowadays, much of our communication is really in the written word. And I know there's been some discussions about how, like in, quote, the older days were a little bit older, let's just say, and so people would read, 300, 400, 500 pages books, no big deal, right?
Right.
Nowadays, you're on Twitter, and if you get in whatever it is, 100 characters, you're lucky. I think, have things changed as far as what we consume and maybe the skill set that people have as far as we communicate differently now, I guess is what I'm trying to get to, is that especially
Absolutely.
in business as well as personally. So how has that changed, and how do we respond to that as far as individually and as business people that are writing communications?
It definitely has changed. Many, many years ago, before the advent of technology and television and radio, that was the only way people communicated, is through words, through letters. And they took their time because they didn't feel rushed. The way of living wasn't a rush. Everybody lived in an agricultural society. You took your time to write your message, and people were more, they were more adept at vocabulary because they wrote and they read all the time. Nowadays, there's such a demand for sound bites and quick information, and our attention spans have decreased. We want information instantly, and we don't want to read too much. We want to get what we need right away and absorb it. So I think in reaction to that, people don't care how they write anymore. They don't care how they enunciate. They just kind of regurgitate it out and hope people will get the message. And there's a lost art. It's definitely a lost art, and I think people need to get back to the basics of writing.
Yeah, I'd have to agree, because if you're constantly consuming information in very tiny pieces, in bits, that's a very different process, I think, from a consumption standpoint, an absorbing and an understanding standpoint, than it is to take something that's a little more drawn out. I think of a novel where you're building up and there's all kinds of things developing and you're trying to understand it.
Right.
Well, nowadays, it sounds, if we don't get right to the point,
exactly.
What's that character's intent? We're I'm going to go do something else.
And sometimes the context is lost in there. And I read the news every day. And I'm astounded at even some of the most supposedly sophisticated news outlets that the grammar is atrocious.
Right.
Sometimes I don't even know what I'm reading, and I have to go back. And so people have always had to meet deadlines. They've always had to get something printed and out. But it's so different now than it was years ago. Things were more professional looking than they are now.
I'll have to agree. I remember because I grew up in Florida, where first it was Florida Today, and then it became the USA Today. Gannett created this new version of the paper, and I think it was designed for a sixth grade level. And they as far as the reading level goes, and I kind of grew up with that development of that particular product. So when you got the paper, you read it, it was pretty quick. And then I remember coming up to college and getting the New York Times for the first time, and I was like, wow, this is an amazing. And back then, this thing was I don't know, it must have been 3 inches thick on Sunday. This darn thing was huge. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I'm not a huge reader myself. But I love to read. Let me just say it this way. I love to read, but reading long things, it tires me out a little bit. So I'm not a natural consumer of long content, but I do enjoy reading, if that makes any sense. But I really enjoyed the Times back then because it had these really in-depth stories. It really went down deep into whatever they were talking about. Whereas I had been used to this relatively short thing. So now we're so how do we get back a little bit to, because I think there's something we've lost a little bit, right? I think I think we've shifted a little too far to this, a little too quick. We're no longer enjoying it, or we're not having developed content.
No,
right?
We're not enjoying it.
Full.
We're not having dialogue. We're having people just throw sound bites at each other, and we're not really communicating.
Right.
I think it really starts with organizing your thoughts.
Okay.
And what you want to say. And that means maybe writing things down first and planning what you want to say. writing is a series of steps. You got to know the building blocks, and everyone should have learned this in school. A lot of us have, but we've forgotten it. I'm not good at writing. I never was. You know, well, think back to your school days. Think back to the basics. It's really basics. It's your plan, your execution, your evaluation, your publication, and your analysis. And you always have to start with a plan. Like everything else, it's a plan.
Right.
What is your goal for writing? What do you want your audience to know? What is so important? And that's where it starts. And then once you have your goal, you've got to find out, well, who am I writing to?
Oh, right. So even in business, they talk about who's your client.
Who is your avatar?
Your perfect
your
client,
audience,
right?
your reader,
Right.
your readership. Who are they? Who are the people that are going to find your material captivating, informational, useful? So it's a little varied between doing content marketing and writing a book, but there's a lot of association. There's a lot of the same thing that happens. You know, it's the same steps. You've got a plan, and then you've got to execute. You've got to start writing, but you can't worry about what you're writing.
Right.
As far as like grammar and spelling, that comes later. Get your thoughts out, but as long as you have a framework, a plan of what you want to say, who you want to say it to, and why you want to say it, then start writing.
Right. I agree. And we're going to go through this whole series of steps that you just mentioned to us.
Yes.
When we come back from the break in just a few minutes, you're listening to Master Your Finances, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. You're listening to Master Your Finance. I'm Kurt Baker here with Andrea Harrison, and we're talking about the importance of writing, personally as well as business, and how it's really changed over the years, where we used to have long books like War and Peace and these things. We'd sit there and spend, weeks, reading this thing. And now, if it takes more than 20 seconds, you've lost somebody, right? So, but it's an art, and it's an important art. And, in business, we're talking primarily about business right now, but you really have to tell your story, and you have to tell it in a way that really points to whoever your, as you said, the avatar is, or that kind of that ideal client that you're really focused on. Doesn't mean that's your only client, but you have to pick somebody to talk to.
Right.
Right. And so when you're writing it, and so you mentioned the basic steps, which are really important. So you're going to plan it, execute, evaluation, publication, analysis. So we start off with a plan. So we plan it, right? Know
Right.
what you're going to do.
Your plan is very important, and you have to start with a goal. What is the purpose of what you're writing or saying? You want to do something. Do you want to persuade? Do you want to inform? Do you want to educate? Whatever you need to do, that would be your goal. And once you establish that, you need to find who your avatar and your audience is, because they're the ones that will be attracted to what you have to say. And you need to have a topic, of course. What are you talking about? What do you want to say? What is your topic of interest? That topic has to grab the interest of your audience. They have to be invested in it. It's got to resolve a pain point they're having, or some interest that a product they're interested in, or a story they want to hear. You've got to appeal to their emotions. Emotions is the key. And then you need to organize your writing. You need to decide what format is going to be in. If you're writing a screenplay, there's a set format and you need to learn it. Or if you're writing a press release, there's a set format that you need to learn.
Okay, so when you're talking about these formats, I think it's just we're talking like, cause some of us are like, okay, what's the format for a press release? Because there's ways to find this out. It's like, okay, I don't know, I have a new product or I have a new service I'm doing, and I just want to let everybody know about it. So when you send that off to the publications, they're going to expect certain things, right? I'm assuming.
They're going to expect that it's newsworthy for their audience.
Right.
And you've got to design the press release in a way that is going to be compelling enough to the editor that they think it's worthy enough to publish. So you got to get your who, what, where, when, as if you're writing an article, but you got to set up your who, what, where, when.
And I know, and I have to agree with that, because on our nonprofit side, we have a nonprofit that we have that we do, and it's about mental health and suicide prevention. So I know every time we think about things we're trying to roll out, we always look at current events,
right,
and how our services and what we do kind of ties into things that are going on like right now. Because there's always things happening out in the world, right? Whether it's financial, you want to write about that.
Right.
Like as an example, the last few days the market's been down, right? So what do you think about that? The tariffs and these things. So you got to kind of tie the current events into whatever you're doing, because that's what people are emotional about, right? You point out the emotion.
Exactly.
Because we make final decisions on emotion. We may analyze, but at some point your feelings get involved.
Exactly.
Right, and we don't think of it that way, right? All the time.
It's funny, even because I'm a churchgoer. I'm very involved in my church, and the pastor. Well, I think a good pastor, when they're doing a sermon, they relate it to current events. They relate
absolutely.
whatever the lesson is in the Bible that they're doing, the passage you're doing, relates to people today.
True, because they wrote the Bible quite a while ago. So you have to kind of say, well, they wrote this book.
Right.
How does that apply to my life today? Right? Because life is different than it was back then. Right?
Exactly.
And I agree with that. And I have to agree. And I have to be very enthusiastic about it too, right?
Exactly.
You have to show that emotion, that enthusiasm about why it's so important. And I think that's even in business, we have to be enthusiastic about what we're talking about. Otherwise, if we're not enthusiastic, nobody else is going to be enthusiastic.
And we can't expect our customer to be, right? Being a content marketing writer is kind of like being a chameleon. You really get to know that person's business and to live and breathe that business before you start writing, because you're being their voice. You're being that business owner or manager's voice. You're speaking for their company, and you want to be able to get the right voice. But in order to do that, you have to know the client's intentions, their goals, and so forth. That's what you need. You need to get that kind of research before you start writing for somebody. And they need to understand that that's their role. They have to know what their goals are for marketing and what they want to say, where they want to say it, how they want to say it. And basically the writer does the translating with all the information that they have. But if you're writing yourself, or you're planning yourself, it's important to know these segments. You may not be fortunate enough to be able to hire a writer. So you have to know these. And even when you're going to hire a writer, you need to know all these steps. You can't just say something, I need content on my website.
Right.
I need something compelling on a Facebook. Well, what are you trying to say? Who are you trying to say it to? This goes back to basic writing concepts and your message and what you're trying to say. And think of a newspaper article, because I was a journalism major. And you always go what they call a reversed pyramid. You start with the most general sentence that's going to capture the essence of the whole article, and you whittle it down to the most specific facts. So that if somebody wants to read the first paragraph and not read any more of it, they'll get the gist of what you're saying. So that's really how what good copywriting is. And
that's what I remember the first time I read the New York Times. I was like, okay, I understand the story, but as I read further, I got more and more details. And this article could be like pages long in some of the cases. But if you got to the point where you're like, okay, I know enough about this where I'm done.
Right,
or
exactly.
Or you might be saying, I really want to learn more. You just keep reading.
In essence, that's how your website should be.
Right.
People should get on your website and know what you're about within seconds, or they're going to get bored. Then you taper it down to specifics. That's why it's so important to have an outline for everything you're going to do, any kind of content you're going to do.
And I've heard like the About Us page is the first page they go to. Is that true? I was at another workshop and they're like, okay, the first place, if you go to a website, I guess you go to the main page. But the first thing they usually click on if they're not familiar with is they'll go About Us. So you have to kind of tell them right away what you are. And then like,
who you are, why you are, what's your
company?
mission. Yeah.
Am I at the right company?
And what are you going to do for your avatar or your customer? If they have a pain point, is your product and service going to resolve it?
Okay, right. That would make sense.
And how is it unique? from somebody else that's offering the same product or service.
I mean, there's more than one out there? More than one
So,
company?
so we got you need your goal, your audience, topic, and organization for your plan, and then from there is the execution, and that's really where the writing takes place, and that's kind of where I get in there with my job. Once I have the person's plan, then I can do the execution. But that doesn't mean that the product is going to be accepted. It needs to be critiqued by the client because they have the last say. It's their message. They want to make sure their message is being construed correctly. And that's why they need to have a plan so they know, well, this is my message and what I wanted to send, but this writing is not accurately reflecting what I want to say. So you've got to be the checks and balances too for the writer.
Right.
I mean, you hire somebody to be a writer, but are they telling your story the way you want it told?
Right, because you're ultimately the expert in whatever is going on. It's your business, right, so to speak.
Right.
So
Exactly.
you have to give feedback on what that is. But formulate it into some kind of content that somebody can actually consume. I have noticed when you go to sites and you can kind of tell when somebody did it themselves, and you can also tell when somebody professionally did it.
Yes.
I mean, you can. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not even an expert at this, but when you read it, you're like, well, that was kind of like, it didn't flow the way you would expect it to flow for whatever
Right.
reason, or it didn't actually get to the point about what we're
Or
talking
there's
about.
typos.
Oh, that's even. Oh, yeah. I haven't. Yeah, that's bad.
But it happens to the best to writers too. I mean, I completed a whole newsletter one time, and someone pointed out you spelled something wrong here. I was mortified, and I had to do the newsletter. But I was so happy someone pointed that out to me because it happens. I mean, I wrote a blurb for my church, was just going to go on our website, and the pastor called me and said, "You didn't spell my name right."
Oh, goodness. Yeah, there you go.
So things like that do happen, and they're embarrassing, but you're glad when people call you on
Well, that's
that.
why it's good to have somebody else look at it. I know a lot of times when we put stuff out, you'll have another set of eyes at least read it.
Exactly.
Because
Exactly.
if you're the one actually writing it, you get kind of honed in on. You'll keep rereading the same mistake over and over again.
Exactly.
Or I've heard the technique where you read backwards. You know, you start at the end and you start reading the words backwards to make sure you don't misspell something and things like that. So I was like, okay, all right, that's weird. but apparently it helps
I've
you.
never tried that strategy.
Yeah, well,
but-
again, nowadays we have spell check, right? So I guess it's not as critical. But back, you would just go backwards because you would if you read the word forward, you're going to see it slightly different. If you read the sentence
Right.
backwards, then you read each word. I guess is the idea behind it. So you're more likely to pick up the fact that you spelt it wrong or you typed it wrong. I mean, back when we had to type and you actually made a mistake, you'd have to start all over again. Remember those days? No longer. So, all right. So we got down to the execution of the plan. And when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about how you go through that final process. And then I guess the evaluation as well, right? So we're listening to Master Your Finances, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. You're listening to Master Your Finances. I am Kurtis Baker, a certified financial planner professional, here with Andrea Harrison. And we're talking about writing and the process of writing and how it really is important. And I think we have to get back to a little more of the content, especially as business owners. It's really important the way information is consumed. And you got to kind of do a lot of different variations of this, right? You got to do your website where you make sure you explain to people what you're doing, but you also got to send out little stuff on social media. So you got to feed it all back, right? So you have to do a lot of different types of writing, which I guess is where professionals get involved and kind of help you because that's time consuming and difficult. And I know a lot of including myself and peers, we talk about how we need to get all this information out, but I don't have the time to do all this stuff, right? I'm working, right?
Often that's the case.
You're overseeing, and you're really usually the highest and best use is some type of networking with other people that want to do business with you and things like that. I mean, sitting down and actually writing it out is not always the best use of your time for most owners of businesses. There's usually other things they can do that are their highest and best use. Right. So, what have you found when you talk to people about this and they start actually doing this and maybe hadn't done it before, actually already knew about it? So, I mean, I'm just thinking about when I first started hiring people in my first like business that grew up, having a number of people working there, is I was like, if I'm going to hire somebody, I have to explain to them what to do. So now I have to write it all down, right? And when you start actually writing down processes and writing down things that your company does or that you do, I think you learn stuff about your company. And sometimes you actually make corrections. You go, well, that's not necessarily the best. Maybe that's the way I did it, but when I write it all out, maybe that isn't the best way to do it. Or they may give you feedback and say, have you thought about doing it this way? So what have you learned about when you start actually helping people with all this stuff and explaining like what they're doing and, clients are coming in and things like that?
Well, what you said is people know their businesses better than anybody else. Oftentimes, they really don't have a plan for what they want to say or how they want to say it. And my job as the writer is to kind of corral them in and say, well, you want to make money, you want to prosper, you want to drive sales, but what is one particular thing you're looking to do right now? Maybe you don't want to push a product. Maybe you just want to make people aware of your branding, of who you are, what kind of value you bring. Maybe you just want to start by getting people to your website. And then maybe later on start talking about promoting a product. And there are different platforms that do that best. If you want to show have a lot of value in your field by giving tips, a blog is often a good idea, or a newsletter. Or if you're really looking into upsell a product that your audience needs, that's when a good ad on Facebook is appropriate, where you really want to zero in and get your product out there and promote it.
I've heard the blog thing before, and the newsletter thing. This is an issue. This is what, anytime I go to these workshops, these are things that always come up with, especially salespeople and people that are supposed to be getting out information and because content. We're in a world of content, supposedly, right?
Right.
Which is true. And so, if you're an expert in a certain area, the idea is you need to roll this information out. And they always talk about blogs and newsletters, and everybody's like, okay, that sounds great. When am I going to do that? So do you have any recommendations on how you can blend somebody who has the expertise, and they're like, yes, I'd love to write a blog once a week or twice, once a month or twice a month, whatever the case is. They come up with something, and then like, but I'm busy. And I don't really, this is not my thing I love to do, so I don't go home and say, oh, gee, I really want to sit down and write a blog today. But they have the information. So do you have any suggestions on how somebody who does have the information, works with somebody maybe to help them get the content out so that doesn't take a lot of their time? I mean, how do you get that time number down? Because that's what everybody complains about. They're like, I know I need to do this, but how do I do it in a time-efficient way?
Right. Well, I was recently working with a woman who does staging people's homes for she works with realtors and helps sellers stage their homes. She wanted to do a Facebook, something on Facebook. But she really didn't know what she wanted to talk about. I mean, well, I tried to help her zero in on some aspects of or nuances of her value and what she can offer to people. And one thing I thought, well, think about, some people think staging is falsifying something. Like when you stage something and you put new carpeting down, you're covering up some flaw in the flooring. Something like that, a nuance or a niche in her business that maybe people haven't even thought about, that they might start thinking about. Well, when I'm doing staging, am I just making my house look sellable, or am I really hiding something? So it's a way to generate thoughts in that area. It's not just, I'm a stager, I'm going to help you arrange your furniture.
So is this something she got like from her feedback, like when she's talking to clients, or like, oh, is this what I'm doing? Is that where that? That's interesting. I never
was
thought of
reading
that.
an article.
I never thought of that,
I
to be
was
honest with
reading
you.
an article about it. That's how I found
I
out
never thought about
it.
that. That's what
But
they're
then
trying
she
to do.
decided she didn't want to do
Mm-hmm.
an a Facebook promotion. But
Mm-hmm.
I gave her some ideas to use, because she was struggling with what to
Right.
say,
Okay.
because she knows generally what she does and how she doesn't. She knows, but I think she was having a tough time thinking of certain areas that the customer might struggle with,
Mm-hmm.
or might come up, with snags when they're trying to stage their home that maybe she wasn't thinking of.
Interesting.
And she knows she's an expert at,
Sure.
but she's not thinking of,
Right. So
So-
it's good to bounce that off somebody else who has a different perspective. And you did the research, so you looked at things that were
Right,
happening and
exactly.
responses people got. See, I never would have thought of it, to be honest with you. See, my view of staging is most of us have too much stuff in our house. So
Mm-hmm.
when somebody comes in stage and says, no, you don't want 3 chairs in that room. You want 1 chair, 1 couch, 1 this,
Right.
1 that. Because I don't know because we actually purchased, when I was younger, we purchased a model home. So obviously it was staged, right?
Right.
But then it looks very different than when you actually start living in it, because now you have the newspaper, the magazines, and you have the
Right.
stuff, and I mean you just have stuff, right? Most of us have some things around, so you fill it up fairly quickly, and you go, wow, this used to be a big house. What happened? So the staging to me is like decluttering it. But I think it's interesting, and I guess some of the other things that I think about is like when somebody's like, okay, I want to write a blog or I want to write a newsletter. One of the things that I think that helps is if you can kind of repurpose information that comes to you. In other words, like you're reading content. Like I'm a financial planner, so I get lots of stuff coming at me constantly. But you can pull out those little specific things you think are relevant to your clients,
Right.
and then repurpose that information essentially, and put your
Sure.
own thoughts on. Okay, all right, the Fed lowered the rates 0.25%. What does that mean? Well, everybody has an opinion about that.
Mm-hmm.
So you can sit there and say, okay, this is what my opinion is at this point in time about it in general. You can't be really specific, especially in my business. You can't say, well, this is exactly what it's going to mean to you. But you can say, these are the types of things that are going to happen now that rates have changed. Now, that kind of thing happens with most businesses where things happen, right? Or there's data coming in.
Exactly.
And I think every industry has some type of feed of information, right? You get some kind of publication, regardless of if you're a stager, I'm sure there's books that come in. So you can say, read those articles and say, oh, okay, well, that's an interesting article. How does that apply to people I know? And then kind
Right.
of rewrite your own thoughts.
Exactly. And then
Right.
your current clients are a good source, because maybe they can help you with, they come across issues and they could probably help you.
Oh, so
Or
ask
your
clients.
audience.
Okay.
What do you want to hear?
Oh, that's good.
What do you
Sounds
need help
obvious,
with?
but it sounds good too.
What do you want to hear about
Right.
that you haven't heard before?
Right.
Kind of like I belong to, besides Princeton, I belong to several other chambers, and I'm on the board. And we're kind of developing a speakers bureau, and we have speakers interested in talking on different topics. But we want to ask our members first what they find they might get value of and find useful, and give the topics to them to survey. Was this something you want to hear, and is this something you'll find useful? So sometimes it helps to talk to people that maybe someday would buy from you
Right.
if,
Oh, I agree 100%. Surveying your own client base and the people
Right.
that you're talking to is absolutely a great way to do that. And you learn about the things they value and what your business is, and you learn the
Exactly.
areas that maybe you could explain better. Because people ask you questions
and
all
they
the time.
appreciate that.
Yeah, people ask questions all the time, and I guess anytime
Right.
somebody asks you a question, well, is that a question other clients may also be asking, or
Yes.
maybe thinking and not asking, and maybe I should just explain it. So anytime
Right.
you're talking to a client, maybe think that is perhaps a topic that I can expand on and put that out in a blog or in a news article or something like
Exactly.
that. So you've been listening to Master Your Finances, and we're going to be right back. Welcome back. You're listening to Master Your Finances. I'm Kurt Baker here with Andrea Harrison, and we're talking about the building blocks for writing. And we started off with the plan, then we're in the middle of execution, then we'll talk about evaluation, publication, and analysis. So Let's get back to the execution part of this.
Well, the execution is your actual putting thoughts to words on the paper or on the keyboard. And important to note is you don't want to start doing any editing or changing. Just get your thoughts out based on your plan. Get them out. Don't go back to a word right away and say, oh, I don't know if that's spelled correctly. You can always check on that later. Just move ahead. Don't get stuck. And come up for air. I can't emphasize this enough. Don't think, and I've done this myself, don't try to get the whole thing written and then don't go back and then not go back to it and just publish it. You need to take a break and then refresh your mind. And then when you come back to it, it may look totally different to you.
Oh, gosh, I have to agree with that. 100%.
And I've done this myself where I've looked at something and I'm like, what was I thinking? And I've had to do some rewrites, and because you have a fresher perspective.
Right.
Always take some time to rest and then go back to your writing.
Because you do get fatigued from a creative standpoint and a processing standpoint. And
absolutely.
I think I agree with that. Absolutely, yes.
And I've pushed myself needlessly, and then I've had to stop and say, your brain needs a rest.
Right.
You can go back to this and have a fresher perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So once you do that, and then you go back over everything, edit, revise, get a second set of eyes always to look at your work. I always, once I do some kind of writing project for somebody, the client needs to review it. They need to and make any requests for revisions. I always give them 2 rounds of revisions as part included in the price, because things change. They might see something that they missed. They want to make a point that they didn't make. I think this should be rewritten. So the client needs to be part of the editing process.
And this is the evaluation process we talked
exactly,
about, right? Right. So.
Exactly. They need to be part of that. Now, once that's all done and you have your published piece, when you're still editing too, that's when you need to go back. You need to, and this is kind of the writer's job, if the writer is working for the client, the vocabulary. Can we facelift the vocabulary a little? Can we improve on that? What about the dress code? I call it the format.
The dress
is it
code?
Following? Yes.
Is it formal? Is it?
Yes, the dress code.
Oh, okay, all right.
Is the
bow tie
type
or no
of
bow tie?
writing have the right format to it?
Gotcha.
And is the client happy with that type of format? And then you need to cite sources if possible. That's so important. You can't use somebody's information without citing and giving them the credit.
Right.
And then once that's all done, then we're ready for publication. After the content is published, then the next stage is the analysis. How is your audience reacting to what you wrote? And for digital marketing, that's analytics, basically. And for traditional types of writing, well, what are people buying your book? Are they responding to your stories? What is the heartbeat out there? Is there a heartbeat?
Right.
So you really have to do your homework in analyzing something and how it's been received, and make changes based on what you hear.
And nowadays it's great because you can analyze this like Google Analytics and things like that, where you
Right.
can actually track it on your website.
Exactly.
So that's really an important part of understanding what articles are really getting the usage. Another thing I hear a lot about, I wonder if you can speak to this a little bit, is like repurposing. So once you write this great content, you don't just have to put it on the blog or just put it in the newsletter. You can redo it or reformulate it based on like a different platform, right?
Absolutely.
So like Twitter is different, obviously,
Right.
than the blog.
You can repurpose it.
But
sure.
you can have a link or somehow put it there as well, correct? So you have to make sure you modify appropriately for the different platforms. Because
Exactly.
Because once you invest in this
Exactly.
content, you want to get it out as many places as you can that are appropriate for the particular business it is.
Exactly.
Right? So,
Like it depends if you're doing a video or infographics, or your content's going to be very different, and you need to tailor it to that particular platform.
oh, you bring up another point, which I hadn't really thought about till just now. Is like, so if you create this content, you could also do a video about the content because now you've actually put the information down, right?
Exactly.
So you
yeah.
can also do it, as a quick little explanation on a particular topic that maybe you want to talk about, because we hear about how we're moving more and more and more to the visual. So
Yes.
you want to have a visual option as well. And I've also heard that even if you create a video, you also want to put the transcription on there because people oftentimes will watch videos, believe this or not, or work, and they don't want to turn the volume on. So sometimes they're like, oh, I'm interested in that. And then if they see the content, then maybe they'll turn the volume up later. But sometimes
That's true.
a lot of the videos are actually watched and read as opposed to watched and listened to in some cases. So that's why you'll see a lot of them that have those transcriptions on them nowadays, especially on like Facebook and Instagram and things
Definitely,
like that. They'll throw that in because they know that it gets more viewership, right?
Sure.
So-
Visual is very, very important. So the analysis, you got to know what's working and what's not, and you need to change your content accordingly to how people are responding.
Mm-hmm.
And that means repurposing your content, refreshing it, changing your format, changing your goal, or you have to look at your plan again and go back and revamp to see what you can change.
Right. So if you have a hot article that's really doing well, I heard you use the term refresh. So like, let's say you had an article that was really, really good. And then later on, I'm assuming what you mean is like later on, maybe 3 months, 6 months, whatever is appropriate, you kind of do an update or you kind of maybe readdress the same topic with kind of more information.
Exactly.
And is that what you mean by the
Yes.
the refreshing? Because I've heard that before,
Yeah.
and I know because some guys are, well, I don't know what else to talk about. We talked about this thing 6 months ago, but we just talked about it. But well, you can talk about it again if things have changed
Things
or
have
things
changed.
have updated.
You can repurpose it. Yes, definitely.
Yeah,
Definitely.
So that's okay to do.
It is okay to do.
So as a business owner, how much time should I be spending on this? Do you have any tips on how we as business owners can be as efficient as possible? Like what parts should we do? And how much time should people maybe devote to this as far as part? Because I know it's important, and we all most of us that aren't natural writers are like, I know I need to do this, but how do I kind of put something in process that makes some sense?
It's all about your marketing goals. And you don't just have one goal. You got to think of what your goals are for the year and break them down, and I guess quarterly. The first quarter of the year, what do you want to accomplish? What's your goal? And then you got to break the goal down further into campaigns. Kind of like, and Google helps you do that. Facebook helps you do that. Because you come up with a campaign, and then you have ad sets.
So you're saying like make an annual, like maybe a quarterly or annual calendar of here's what we want to put out.
Yeah,
here's how we're
you
going to do
can
it.
have a general campaign,
Right.
and from that campaign, break down that campaign further into different messages and ad sets, depending on what you're trying to
I think it's
promote.
a great idea. So you literally schedule it.
Yes.
You schedule. Here's what we're going to do this week, this month, whatever the case may be. I know when you do newsletters and things like that, you need to do that. If you're going to say you're going to do a monthly newsletter, you have to do a monthly newsletter. So what you're saying is make kind of an overall one. So here's how often we're going to do a blog post. Here's how often we're going to do Facebook. And here's how often we're going to do this and do video. And if you write it all down, then you could back into how you get it all out there.
And I think businesses are doing that now because they're hiring like social media managers, and they need an idea of the timing and what to post, and then once they get the gist of what the company wants, then they kind of take the helm. But it's up to the company to tell them what or how long, what's the timeline for this, and who are we reaching, and why is this so important? So
Right, and I think that one of the things that I kind of see happening is that we can get data very easily, but we don't get personality. So when a company blends like current data information that's
Right.
out there. Like you can Google almost anything, right? And say, okay, well, there's the fact on that. But okay, what's the opinion? What does my local vendor think about this? Whether, it's staging or whether it's like a new carpet or whether it's, buying a car, whatever it is, what are my local people that I'm probably going to be talking to? What are their thoughts about all this? So as owners and business people, we can go out and say, hey, here's what this kind of means to us.
Right.
And people will read that because they don't,
Testimonials are
Right.
Testimonials will really make a big difference with people.
Right.
We all look at Yelp now and want to see how a restaurant rates before we go in.
Right.
That's important. We need to know what we're getting into.
That's true. That's very true. So there's a lot of data out there, and writing is really important. Andrea, really appreciate you coming on. You've been listening to Master Your Finances.
Thank you for having me. This has
my
really been
pleasure.
a lot of fun.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. Andrea Harrison, and you've been listening to Master Your Finance. You can subscribe to the podcast by going to masteryourfinances.us. And remember that together we can master your finances so you can enjoy financial peace of mind.
It's hard to keep up with the fast-paced financial world, but because of Master Your Finances, you have a head start. Thank you for listening to this week's edition of Master Your Finances with Kurt Baker, our certified financial planner professional, only on 107.7 The Bronx and 107.7thebronx.com. Tune in next week, Sunday at 9 a.m. to get a boost on your financial planning. But if you missed a week, you can check out past episodes. Just go to masteryourfinances.us to check out past episodes and more. Master Your Finances is underwritten by Certified Wealth Management and Investment LLC. Money doesn't grow on trees, but it can grow your portfolio. Thanks to Kurt Baker and Master Your Finances. On Sundays at 9 a.m. exclusively on 107.7 The Bronx and 107.7thebronx.com.